On June 23, 1944, the Red Army began one of the largest military campaigns of World War II, with the stated goal of annihilating German Army Group Center in Nazi-occupied Belarus. Although Army Group Center had proven difficult to crack in the past, as seen in the Red Army's failure during Operation Mars, recent successes at Kursk, Kiev, Crimea, and the Dnieper-Carpathian Offensive had given a new opportunity for the Soviets to attack the now exposed Army Group. The offensive, named after the Russian general Pyotr Bagration during the Napoleonic era, would involve over 2.5 million men, 2,200 tanks, 10,000 aircraft, and 31,000 guns. An analysis of the Eastern Front by the Soviet General Staff and State Defense Committee in March 1944 gave them several options on how to continue the advance on Berlin. Option 1 was to continue south, as the Germans expected, advancing into southern Poland and knocking Axis satellite states out of the war. However, this option would overextend Soviet supply lines and force them to commit to fighting in the difficult Balkan terrain. Option 2 was to thrust northwest from Ukraine to the Baltic Sea. However, this too was beyond Soviet capabilities at the time. Option 3 was to focus their attention north, defeating Finland and reoccupying the Baltic states, but could lead to a stalemate against the Baltic coast. Operation Bagration was one of 5 summer offensives the Soviets had planned, all along the front, but it was the centerpiece of the summer. Knowledge of the offensive was kept top secret, and only Stalin, Zhukov, Vasilevsky, and Antonov had any knowledge about it. The 1944 summer campaign began with an attack against Finland, with the goal of seizing the Karelo-Finnish Isthmus, which they had failed to conquer during the Winter War in 1939 to 1940. The eventual defeat of the Finns would distract the Germans from the threat to Army Group Center. Stalin gathered his generals on the 22nd and 23rd of May for a planning conference ahead of the upcoming offensive. Konstantin Rokossovsky, who would eventually lead the offensive, clashed with Stalin over his desire to double envelope the Germans near Bobruisk with 2 tank corps, but held his ground. Ivan Konev, who led the First Ukrainian Front, was asked by Stalin on how he could broaden Bagration's scope, of which he replied that he could encircle and destroy the German forces east of Lvov and use 2 tank armies to thrust towards the Vistula River. Again, Stalin pushed back against such complicated maneuvers, but the Marshal eventually won out. The directive for the operation was issued on May 31st and would involve incredibly complicated logistical operations and moving forces in secret across the entire front. This schedule could not be met, however, and so the offensive was postponed to June 23rd. The Soviets had far superior numbers of men and material going into the battle, with over 2.8 times the number of divisions and 13.1 times the number of artillery guns. The Germans, on the other hand, lacked adequate defenses in the region, with not enough manpower to have a traditional defense in depth, only being able to scramble enough resources to build a second defensive line a few hundred meters to the west and another secondary line another 4 to 6 kilometers behind the front. The Soviets' large-scale concealed deployment of forces in Belarus and the simulated concentration of forces in southern Poland and Romania sufficiently ensured that the Germans had no idea when or where the Soviets would really strike. Soviet deception, otherwise called Maskirovka, hinged on convincing the Germans what they already suspected, that the main thrust of the summer would be along the southern axis of the front. Military deception was carried out at 3 levels by the Stavka: the strategic, where the location, timing, and strength of the attack was hidden; the operational, where the location, strength, and objectives of each force were hidden; and tactical, where each unit hid its troop concentration, armor, and guns. The Germans were simultaneously distracted by the Soviet offensive in Finland, Allied presence in Italy, and the upcoming invasion of France. Although the Germans successfully predicted the number and concentration of Soviet front-line forces, they had no clue about the presence in the rear and the concentration of troops behind the front line. As the Luftwaffe's presence dwindled, owing largely to the effort of the Western Allies, this made aerial reconnaissance totally impotent, and ground reconnaissance further failed to penetrate deep into the Soviet rear. Furthermore, the delay of the offensive made it even more difficult to predict when it was to occur. From the corps level and below, the Germans anticipated an attack, but the High Command believed their concerns to be exaggerated. Commander of Army Group North Walter Model and Chief of General Staff Kurt Zeitzler even managed to convince Hitler to redeploy 56th Panzer Corps away from the point of attack and to the south. As late as June of 1944, Colonel Reinhard Gehlen, who headed the Eastern Front's intelligence office, still predicted that the Soviets would strike south. Army Group Center was a shell by the time the offensive began, and the Germans were completely unprepared as to what was to come. Although the main offensive started on the 23rd, Soviet units had already begun attacking German positions as early as the 19th. From the 19th to the 20th, Soviet partisans attacked Nazi railroads, bridges, and other key infrastructure in Army Group Center's area of operation. Over 1,000 transportation nodes were destroyed, making German retreat, resupply, and lateral troop movements impossible. From the 21st to the 22nd, Soviet bombers attacked the German rear, and reconnaissance battalions moved into the German front line in areas sparsely populated by enemy troops. Some of these recon units were so successful in thrusting deep into German territory that the Soviet planned artillery barrages needed to be cancelled to prevent friendly fire. The main attacks officially began on June 23rd, consisting of tanks, self-propelled guns, and infantry. German 50mm anti-tank guns were ineffective against the frontal armour of the T-34, but the German troops made effective use of anti-tank mines, explosives, and Panzerfausts to destroy Soviet armour. However, most Soviet commanders simply opted to go around isolated pockets of resistance and continue westward, leaving other units to mop up later. On the 24th, Rokossovsky began his assault along the First Belarusian front. Attacking from the swamps, the Germans were caught by surprise, due to his engineers building causeways and ramps through the swampy terrain to allow his forces to penetrate. Southeast of Bobruisk, the 65th, 48th, and 3rd Soviet armies routed the German 35th Corps, 41st Panzer Corps, and the 20th Panzer Division. The commanders of the 20th Panzer Division spent 2 days marching back and forth, trying to locate the enemy in the wake of confusing and contradictory orders. Opposite Orsha and Mogilev, the Germans initially had more luck, beating back Soviet attacks. Mogilev was later encircled, and Hitler ordered it to be held to the last man, although many German soldiers simply abandoned the town. Hitler often ordered encircled German positions to be defended to the last man. However, their often wooden construction with no cellars made defending for a long period of time impossible. On the Minsk highway, the 78th Sturm Division halted the 11th Guards Army attack. However, these successes were largely insignificant in the broader context of the offensive, as major gaps had been opened in the north and south between various panzer divisions and armies. It wasn't until 3 days after the initial offensive began that Oberkommando des Heers, or OKH, the German Army High Command, properly understood the gravity of the Soviet offensive. They quickly scrambled the 5th Panzer Division to fill the gap between the 3rd Panzer and 4th armies. All they achieved, however, was ambushing Soviet forward elements, but it did not stop the oncoming onslaught. The Soviets faced challenges with their armor in the terrain of Belarus, but as Pavel Rotmistrov, Chief Marshal of Soviet armored troops, found out, the forests and swamps in the region meant that engagements were at very close range, giving plenty of ambush sites for German anti-tank soldiers and Panzerfausts to enact havoc against the Soviet armor. Minsk fell on the 2nd of July, where forward detachments and tanks broke through the German front line and penetrated the breach. The Germans were so disorganized that the city was captured on the morning of the 3rd July, before they could even organize a defense. Hitler belatedly issued Operations Order No. 8, commanding the reconstruction of a front made up of surrounded troops, but German commanders on the ground requesting withdrawal or maneuvering were refused constantly. Soviet advances south were so successful, it quickly became a battle for the Polish border. Between the 22nd of June and the 4th of July, Army Group Center suffered the loss of 25 divisions and 300,000 men, and would lose an additional 100,000 in the following weeks. The Soviet advance would slow down to a temporary halt, owing to heavy casualties to both armor and infantry, but this offered little reprieve to the beleaguered Germans. Walter Model, commander of Army Group North Ukraine, was also given command of Army Group Center on June 29. Operation Bagration would soon expand, much to Model's displeasure, as the Soviets attacked the front from Lvov to Kovel, turning the two separate fronts into one continuous battle ranging from the Baltic South all the way to the Carpathian Mountains. Soon after, the Stavka ordered a general advance in what became the Lvov-Sandomierz Offensive just south of the Pripyat marshes. Konev was directed to destroy elements of the North Ukraine Army Group in Lvov by attacking both northeast and east of Lvov. As the attack began, Konev organized a feint near Stanislav to the south, creating a significant superiority over the Germans at his points of attack, even though overall the two sides were evenly matched in number. The 3rd Guards and 13th Armies had penetrated 15 kilometers before mechanized cavalry and tanks plunged into the gap created. Konev continued his attack on the direct approaches to Lvov, but was unable to open up corridors for Rybalko and Lelyoshenko's armor. As a result, the German 1st Panzer Army launched a series of counterattacks, and Konev ordered the two commanders to move through the narrow corridor and open up its shoulders. The advance of the 1st Guards Tank Army and Sokolov's mechanized cavalry blew open the defenses of Lvov. As the Soviets advanced, they trapped the 13th Army Corps near Brody, encircling 45,000 men, with no more than 5,000 escaping. Konev ordered Kharkov and Rybalko to turn towards the Vistula River and create a bridgehead to allow the Red forces to cross. German reserve troops from Hungary vainly clashed against the Soviet lines, to no avail. By this point, the Germans were completely expelled from western Ukraine. By the end of the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive, the Soviets had lost 289,296 casualties, including 65,000 dead, missing, or captured, while the Germans had lost 136,860 casualties, including 55,000 dead, missing, or captured. On the 18th of July, Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian Front, who had otherwise been used to distract the Germans from offensive operations at Lvov, went into action north of Sandomierz in southern Poland. Lieutenant General Gusev and Colonel General Chuikov tore into the German defences on the 18th and had reached the western Bug River on the 21st. Lieutenant General Bogdanov's 2nd Tank Army pushed towards the Vistula and Lublin, with the 11th Tank and 2nd Guards Cavalry Corps attempting to cut off Army Group Center's retreat. Major General Vedeneyev's 3rd Tank Corps encountered panzer counterattacks organized by Model. From the 30th, German forces of the Hermann Goering and 19th Panzer Divisions continued to strike the beleaguered Soviet Tank Corps. Although it withstood attacks for 3 days, the participation of 4th Panzer and 5th SS Panzer Divisions mauled both the 3rd Tank Corps and 8th Guards Tank Corps. Soviet forces of the 47th Army were stretched thin across an 80-kilometer front south of Warsaw to Shedlce. As the Soviet 2nd Tank Army approached Warsaw, soon after the Second Warsaw Uprising began. I won't really talk much about it in this video, other than to say that although the Soviets were unable to help due to the military situation, they were also unwilling due to the pro-Western leanings of the Polish Home Army. Operation Bagration lasted from the 22nd of June to the 19th of August, and by its end destroyed 28 of 34 German divisions, completely shattering the German front line and liberating Belarus entirely from Nazi occupation. The Red Army had crossed the Neman, Vistula, and Naru rivers, and had totally decimated Army Group Center. Army Group Center's strength dropped from 888,000 troops to 445,000 by the end of the offensive, but Hitler drew encouragement from the fact that the front was now shorter. For the Soviets, of the 2,331,000 troops engaged in Belarus and Lublin-Brest, 178,507 were killed and 587,308 wounded. Although they suffered heavy casualties, the Red Army's overall strength grew from 6,394,500 troops in March of 1944 to almost 6.5 million in fall. Soviet armoured strength also grew overall in spite of heavy casualties, while German material and guns supply dropped. Although Minister of Armaments Albert Speer was able to keep wartime production at sufficient levels, Germany's crippling lack of manpower rendered it useless. From mid-August, the Soviets reorganized and prepared for the coming Vistula-Oder offensive, and began the process of clearing the northern and southern flanks of the Bagration offensive. Bagration had, by its end, completely annihilated the German army in the east, and is still to this day the worst defeat in German military history. It completely destroyed Nazi Germany's defensive capabilities, and from this point forward, the defeat was only a matter of time. Thanks for watching.